Hi, good afternoon. I am Dr. Severance, the coordinator of the criminology program here at Eastern. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Fernando Bermudez. Mr. Bermudez lost over 18 years in the New York State maximum security prisons following his wrongful conviction of murder in the shooting death of Raymond Blount in 1991. Mr. Bermudez was proven innocent in late 2009 with help from pro bono attorneys in Washington, D.C., New Jersey, and New York. His case presents a rare instance of New York case law in which a judge has overturned a conviction on actual innocence grounds. The sole evidence against him involved mistaken and coerced identification by 5 teenagers who later recanted their testimony. Mr. Bermudez is married with 3 children. He lives in Connecticut. His wife, Crystal's here with him today. He recently completed his bachelor's degree in behavioral sciences, summa cum laude. He's considering law school and graduate degree offers while adjusting to life outside prison. Mr. Bermudez has also developed a distinguished public speaking career, having spoken at over 200 venues, including Columbia University, Cornell, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, and Harvard, in both New Haven and Hartford federal district courts in Connecticut. Internationally, he has accomplished lecture tours through Italy, Germany, Japan, and France, with 2015 lecture plans in India, Turkey, and London. In February 2011, Mr. Bermudez filed a suit of $30 million against the City of New York for his wrongful incarceration, and in 2012 to help abolish Connecticut's death penalty, working with Connecticut legislators. In 2013, Columbia University's School of Law published his essay, Stolen Happiness, in spring 2013. For 2014, his American set lecture venues include the Jefferson Society, the Lawrenceville School, Stanford Law, and Vanderbilt University. So please welcome Mr. Fernando Bermudez.
Friends, alumni, and supporters, good afternoon. My name is Fernando Bermudez. Struck by fate, yet rising with destiny to address the scourge of wrongful convictions. Thank you for inviting my wife and I today to Eastern Connecticut State University, and for Dr. Severance and her introduction as well. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. American ideals, means to justice, not always realized because of flaws in human error, perception. I'm talking about a problem within our American criminal justice system that addresses directly a public safety and human rights issue that neither popes nor presidents have addressed. More to the point, I'm talking about flawed American justice, which has resulted in over 2,000 innocent men and women since 1989 being incarcerated for crimes they did not commit, to the collective tune of over 2,000 not only innocent people incarcerated, but over 10,000 lost years in prison. I never expected this problem to happen to me. But imagine that you were on the verge of a promising career, of a fruitful relationship, of a promotion, of you being happy with your life, it's seeming full of promise, when suddenly all of that is stripped from you and you're terribly sad, forced to endure a fight for your life, a fight for freedom, a fight for your sanity. On August 6, 1991, this is exactly what happened to me. When while living in Washington Heights, I'm arrested at gunpoint by detectives. I don't know why I'm being arrested. I'm sandwiched between two burly detectives. One of them with a Bostonian accent who says quite curtly, "Let's move this car." And I don't know why I'm being arrested. I end up at the 6th Precinct in Lower Manhattan. And I keep asking, why am I here? They tell me, "You should know. You've been arrested." I said, "No, I don't." Hours would pass that night of August 6th, the morning thereof, actually. And the detectives and then prosecutor in my face throughout my interrogation want to know my whereabouts on August 3rd and 4th, 1991. Why, sure, I remember. That night, I was celebrating my enrollment in college, set to enter the medical profession, hoping to make my parents proud and contribute to society, I explained. My alibi witnesses, upon finding out that I'm arrested from my hysterical mother, come to the precinct as well. And during my 10 hours of interrogation, I repeatedly state my whereabouts and that under no circumstances, I emphasize, was I at a club called the Mark Ballroom, in which, by all accounts, Ephraim Lopez, age 16, who had absconded from a work release program and was outside of his curfew, wasn't supposed to even be outside on that night, had been punched inside the nightclub by Raymond Blount. Angry, embarrassed, he sought retaliation outside the nightclub by pointing out Raymond Blount to his other friends inside and outside the nightclub who had descended a few blocks away from NYU to attack Raymond Blount and his friends. A shot rang out, ricocheting and hitting several victims, including myself, when in fact I wasn't there, but I ended up being arrested because the teenage witnesses really did not know what they saw on the night in question under fleeting nighttime conditions which help encompass the reason why most people get incarcerated. That is mistaken eyewitness identification, which today, out of the over 2,000 wrongful incarcerations, accounts for 75% of why innocent people land in prison, in connection with other egregious problems, such as police and prosecutorial misconduct, which now, in the police precinct, I would start realizing. Are we talking Greek and Swahili, it seems? Because I continue telling the police and prosecutor that I wasn't at that nightclub, that I'm driving around with my friends, and under no circumstances we had been to this nightclub. But they don't believe me. They don't believe my alibi witnesses. Instead, what they were relying upon was a very shaky foundation of mistaken eyewitness identification, which began my problem and grew worse when a young lady, 17, selected my picture as being someone who resembled the shooter at the nightclub, and then impermissibly shared my picture with the other witnesses. What that created was a psychological interplay of reinforcement in the mind in which the witnesses who had been hungry, tired, and attacked on that evening, and by their own accounts didn't even want to be in the police precinct, then decided to say, yeah, this could be him. For police and prosecutors, that was enough then to put me in a lineup in which, when they already saw my pictures, they identified me, even though I was told to sit down in the lineup. In part, we would later learn, because the perpetrator, by all accounts, was described as standing 5'10", weighing 165 pounds, versus my 6'2", 220 pounds. But I don't know any of this as I'm sitting down and something is feeling terribly wrong, like the fix is in a very bad way. And so for my stubbornness and refusing to confess, after I'm selected, I'm told, I'm sent to Rikers Island. Rikers Island in Queens, New York, being the largest penal colony in the world. 14,000 angry, yelling, violent inmates there, awaiting resolution of their cases, where I too now am forced to depend on the American criminal justice system and set me free. In the context of New York City at the time, 1991, I'm talking about a city where there's over 2,000 homicides each year due to the crack epidemic. And police and prosecutors, by their own admission, are overwhelmed. And they don't really have time to investigate. And they certainly, by their own admission, don't investigate my case. I find this out because I go to trial from Rikers Island, and they not only admit not investigating, but also they have manipulated the evidence beyond allowing the witnesses to view pictures together, which is unconstitutional. I'm talking about, at the trial, Ephraim Lopez is naming me as someone I'm totally not. He's saying I'm someone named Wu Lu, whereas my street name at the time is well known. And he's saying that I'm the one who shot the guy who punched him. Now, I'm very hurt by this because 3 friends of the deceased who were standing right next to Raymond Blount when he was shot come forward and say that I'm not the one who shot their best friend. In addition, I testify, and my alibi witnesses come forward and tell the same. But what I don't know, and will later find out and prove, is that 2 witnesses have unrelated criminal charges against them dismissed if they testified against me. Moreover, Ephraim Lopez himself, who was under 27 hours of interrogation by the police, 27 hours at 16, imagine the vulnerabilities of this kid being subjected to such pressure. I'm hurt because Ephraim Lopez, we would later prove, had told the police and prosecutor that Wu Lu was actually responsible. He told the police and prosecutor where the person could be found. He told them characteristics and everything else that could have just paused the case and allowed them to get the real person. But at the time, all of this is just starting to seep into existence, and it's too late for my defense to do anything about it. In particular, because the prosecutor, shame on him, turns over boxes of evidence that my attorney is supposed to inspect, but he turns it over right when my jury is being impaneled. And when he asks the judge to pause the trial so that he could look at all the boxes of evidence, the judge refuses and says that the case has already begun, thus handicapping my case even more. And yet, I still believe that I have a chance. In fact, right before the jury comes back from deliberations, I'm offered a plea bargain of 7 to 15 years in prison if I plead guilty at that moment to manslaughter. Why I refuse, I tell my defense attorney, because I didn't do this, nor would I even take time served and walk out of the prison if it meant me saying that I committed a crime. As a result, I'm found guilty. And I'm sentenced to 23 years to life in an upstate New York's maximum security prison. I'm besides myself with grief, seeing my mother rise up in the courtroom crying, and my father rising up in the courtroom to exclaim to the prosecutor, "You're the only criminal in this courtroom. The truth will prevail." Upon which the prosecutor hides. Grief is not a trip you can pack for. It shocks the conscience. It makes you shudder with the reality of your identity being stripped away into another dimension of sorrow, of being inconsolable. And that's how I feel being shackled, going in an upstate prison. I'm sitting next to a pudgy short kid with shaggy hair, no neck, and glasses so big you would think he's a welder. And his hot breath is asking me questions. Oh, what are you in here for? I'm just looking at him as he explains that he only has a year in prison to do, and I got a life sentence. And as I drift off, I see my old neighborhood passing by on the Major Deegan Expressway. And then we stop to an upstate maximum security prison where my head is shaven and my clothes are stripped, and I'm given a green prison uniform with my numbers on it. And my name now is just simply Bermudez when my numbers aren't called. I'm given, in one sense, my own ice bucket challenge when I'm told to put lice liquid on myself and everyone else who's with me coming into the prison, and then we're doused with water so cold it'd be like, I suppose, skinny dipping in the Arctic. But I determined myself that if I stay strong, if I start educating myself, that there can be a difference in my case, because I know that I didn't commit this crime. And so I go to upstate prison where my now existence becomes a 6-by-9 foot cell. Roach infested. Noise. Violence that had continued from Rikers Island with unsettled beefs being resolved at the end of a knife, where men were getting cut across their faces in what was called the $1.50, meaning you needed 150 stitches to close the gaping wound. And I'm very depressed in this place, praying, trying to exercise, trying to hold my sanity. And I even consider committing suicide for the moment, because 23 years to me seems like a marathon that I can't finish. It's not a sprint. It seems like a road that would never end for me. However, I think about my parents. I think about those who love me instead of thinking of my own selfish needs and desire to escape my horrific reality. And I decide to turn around the evil that I feel around me and that I feel within me. To turn around that word evil and turn around those words into live, the opposite of evil when the words are turned around. And I begin praying and I begin writing until an attorney hears my cry and starts working on my case free of charge. She leaves her Westchester estate and she starts investigating. This little lady, with the energy of a hummingbird, standing 5 feet tall, 100 pounds soaking wet, with high heels, and the voice of a teeny bopper, is determined to find the truth in my case. She starts investigating and she discovers that the witnesses had all been yearning to tell the truth as to why they purposely put me in prison at the behest of police and prosecutors. We go to trial. I should say we filed an appeal to go to trial. But unfortunately, the same judge who sentenced me with a resounding pound of the gavel to life in prison laughs at her, basically, and tells her to get out the courtroom. that the evidence that she's producing, in that the witnesses have now recanted their evidence, that they have revealed all the reasons why they purposely lied against me, is incredible. So, I'm devastated by this, and yet I'm still hopeful that the truth can prevail. But unfortunately, it's taking years now. Now the years are passing by. 1992, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm becoming a person now who's becoming conditioned to living in a 6-by-9-foot cell, with the surrounding violence around me and all the madness and dysfunction that can create and contribute to the prison system, to the burgeoning problem then that is now mass incarceration. As I lose appeals, invariably my chances of winning are becoming less and less. The question is, how can I pass through the eye of this needle? Why continue writing? I continue writing journalists, letters, as many people as I can. And at the same time, I'm getting hope from a very special lady who enters my life. My wife, Fernando Bermudez, who's here with me today, who starts writing me and giving me hope in the early years of my incarceration until we got married during my incarceration. And we have children together in my situation. She shows me a level of love that gives me strength through the children that are born from our conjugal visits in my dark and sorrowful situation. And as I'm trying to fight, I now have to try to find ways to help her and help my children who are growing up throughout my incarceration. And so in the early years, I had earned a business degree, and so I started using that in prison in a good sense. It ranged from me buying clothing wholesale, which I retailed, not for money because in prison you can't have money, but for items that I bartered, such as soap, detergent, deodorant, toothpaste, anything that was sold in the prison store, in which, say, if I bought a shirt for $5, I would sell it for $20 in bartered goods. I would create a collection of this stuff, and I would send it home either through the package room or when I saw my wife privately on our visits, in which she would then take those products and sell them in a store and then help pay the bills that way with physical cash obtained through that move. It came to the point where I employed Economics 101 so tight that when I was reading the Wall Street Journal and studying personal finance, as I was throughout the years, I realized, for example, that there had been a depletion in the South American waters off Chile of Jack Mack. I'm talking about mackerel, the fish. But in prison, Jack Mack is considered a delicacy because it comes in a can. The prisoners take the can, the fish, and they clean it and they bread it up with such things such as Cheez-Its or cornflakes, whatever you can think of to bread it. And what they do is they fry it and it becomes a delicacy, equivalent to, say, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now, when I saw that there was a depletion off the waters of Chile of fish and Jack Mack in particular, I decided to go to the commissary and buy as many cases of Jack Mack that I could. I'm talking about supply and demand now, in which my prediction came true because the commissary eventually ran out of Jack Mack. Now I'm able to take $1 that I paid for each can and sell it for $3 a can. All of these were things that help keep my hope and mental stability alive. It's something that helped me from helping my mind to become my best friend rather than my enemy. As I read books after books, seeking to educate myself, seeking to escape the grim reality, and the depression that I was going through. For this, I would encourage you that in any circumstance or adversity that you face, that you rise above your circumstances so that you can see a better view and gain the perspective that you need to overcome any adversity in your lives. And that's what I had to do. Rather than wallowing in despair, walking around in prison on Thorazine like a zombie to escape my reality or my depression. And yet, depression remained my enemy because I kept losing appeal after appeal because the judge in state court didn't want to listen. I go to federal court, and the judge there, a federal judge, allows the witnesses to come forward. And they all reveal the reasons why they lied. For me, it's the dawning of a new day. Hope is imminent in that finally I can go home in the year 2002. The year that my daughter Carissa, my second daughter, had turned 1 year old, which I felt was a good sign in that her turning 1 that year, for me, meant that I would be home with her soon, along with my other daughter. Ephraim Lopez himself came forward. The kid, throughout the years, never stopped getting in trouble. He came in shackled, escorted by federal marshals, clink, 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 and stepped by my defense table and said, "I'm so sorry what I did to you." And then he was escorted away. And my lawyers looked at me and they said, "Well, what do you think about that, Bermudez?" And I said, "Well, I forgive him in the name of Jesus Christ." And they looked at me and said, "Whatever," I guess because they were Jewish. And the point is that they really just didn't understand that for me, regardless of religion and what you believe in, for me, it was a victory in that I needed to forgive. I needed to stop that hatred, that anger, that bitterness that was festering in me. I needed to let go and shift the power to one of greater redemption and peace with what had happened to me. And at that very moment, I shifted that power by forgiving that man. Because I realized and had realized through the whisper of my conscience that when you hold a grudge, that grudge holds you. It doesn't do anything for your well-being. You feel tight like a tourniquet. You feel irritated. And I needed to let that go, even though I was still incarcerated. And yet, for all of this, I'm denied. I'm denied, and I go throughout the motions as if I'm split in three between resentment, anger, and bitterness once again. And yet, by 2004, I realized that instead of giving up to my circumstances and just allowing myself to sink into despair yet again, I need to become proactive and right. In fact, I need to exercise my faith. I realize that I need a higher power that's even greater than myself. Not that I was great, but that there was a power beyond me that whispered to me in the darkness of that 6 by 9 foot cell that if something so peculiar happened to you, there would be a peculiar outcome. And you needed to have faith in that result. And so I joined the choir. And I started singing songs, gospel and all that. Because I needed to believe in that higher power. And speak into existence that justice will prevail. I start writing letters, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone and everyone who could listen. And my story becomes a national situation in which, as a result, they start petitioning outside the Manhattan District Attorney's office with signs, with politicians getting involved. The New York Times blasts it on front page. So much so that the district attorney's office starts investigating behind our backs. In reality, trying to incriminate me. Hoping that this situation would finally end after I've lost so many appeals. And yet, I get a new team of attorneys this time because my first pro bono attorney had gotten cancer and had been disabled in many ways, that she could no longer be involved. And so this new team of attorneys comes from Washington, D.C., New York and New Jersey law firms. And they start writing, drafting up a new case on my behalf, using evidence that I already had built up, demonstrating my innocence throughout the years. And we enter state court this time. My 11th appeal, which really seemed like a foregone conclusion that I would lose, according to many legal opinions, in prison and outside, based on the odds of having lost so many and your chances of winning. But the judge ordered my case to be opened. He ordered it to be opened because of the accumulated evidence that demonstrated my innocence. In turn, the district attorney's office grew very nervous. And what they did was that they offered me a plea bargain. So I'm at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, finishing my second bachelor's degree. I should say my second associate's degree, going towards my bachelor's at that moment. And I'm in the yard walking around when I get the call that I'm being offered a plea bargain that if I plead guilty to manslaughter, I could go home that week. Now, I wanted to go home so bad after 18 years. It had been over 18 years of a dreadful, sad, torturous existence. But one thing I realized was that I wasn't going to live with a lie. I wasn't going to live with a conviction that would still be around my neck like a millstone and jeopardize my future career, employment, and so much else. I said no. I would not accept that. I would not accept that under the risk that if I went to a parole board in the year 2014, which I would have seen this year, then the parole board would deny me because they would want me to express remorse or accept responsibility for the crime. I could never do that. Yet, I explained, I was willing to die in prison. So I rejected that deal. In 2009, I walked into court. And I was nervous because it had been such a great legal proceeding in which my lawyer skillfully knocked down the house of cards that was the prosecution's case. Blew it away, literally. And yet, I know I had lost 10 appeals and this was my 11th. So I stood there when the judge asked me to rise. And he said, in the case of the people of the state of New York versus Fernando Bermudez defendant, I hereby find the defendant Fernando Bermudez actually innocent. And I felt a punctuating sigh of relief as everyone in the courtroom, attorneys from all the years past who had tried and had worked on my case, journalists, my little sister who was then 6 when I was arrested, now in her 20s, my whole family there had exhaled in relief. And the judge didn't stop there, ladies and gentlemen. He said that the prosecutor knew and should have known that he was relying upon perjured testimony to convict me. That the New York City Police Department used illegal identification procedures to convict me in the same way that the federal judge had ruled in my favor, yet stopped short of overturning my conviction. Moreover, he said that the state of New York has also admitted that his star witness, i.e. Ephraim Lopez, had lied. He gave me an actual innocence ruling, the first of its kind in New York State legal history, because it received the same recognition as a DNA-based exoneration. Soon after, the handcuffs are taken off. And I come out into a brave new world, if you will, blinking in reality in 2009. A world that had changed so much since 1991, having gone through several presidencies. Now we have the internet, I realize. Now we have cell phones that are this small, whereas before they were the sizes of shoe boxes. Fashion having changed, with the request that I jump into some what's called skinny jeans. So much had changed. As Alicia Keys with Jay-Z sang that song, New York, New York. And I went to the Stride, still remembering my dance steps from the 80s, and being told by the younger folks that I was out of style. I needed to get in touch with Usher or Chris Brown to get down. But it didn't matter to me because I was a free man. One of the founders of our country, Thomas Jefferson, our third president, spoke about that when it comes to fashion, swim with the current. And I did. And when it comes to principle, stand like a rock. And I did. And as a result, I was a free man. And I came out with my family and I started trying to adjust. But it wasn't a situation where I rode off into the sunset as they do in the movies. No. It was a situation in which I quickly realized that I still felt, and still to this day, feel like I'm in prison even though I've been free for 5 years right now. To this day, I still feel like I'm in prison, even though I've traveled around the world sharing my story. I still feel like I'm being observed. I still feel like I'm still wearing a prison uniform. Like I don't have the rights that perhaps you have taken for granted today because I was without them for so long. My diagnosis today is post-traumatic stress disorder, equivalent to that of a military veteran who's seen horrible things and had horrible things done to him or her as well. Because in one sense, I was a prisoner of war. I was a prisoner, I realize, of mass incarceration, in which today America has 2.3 million people still incarcerated. As economic leaders, we also lead America in the incarceration rates, surpassing China, Russia, and other countries. Mass incarceration, I realized, where I was a part of that problem. Where 1 out of every 4 black men are incarcerated on prison or on parole in their lives because of mass incarceration, which profits, with Latinos being right behind them. In New York State, where I was, for example, 85% being black and Latino, in which the upstate communities benefited from our incarceration through cheap labor, exploitation, collect calls which would cost $10 for 30 minutes, which my wife had no way to pay. All these things I realized I was. But the damage that I felt was to myself as well. And that was that I was waking up still thinking I was in prison. My heart palpitating. Me standing up in prison like I was still being counted. Embarrassingly to say, washing my clothes in the shower as if I was still in the prison bathhouse where I had to bathe with 50 naked men. The counterfeit breasts of transsexuals in the steam, creating the illusion for those who sought to go that route. And so I see my psychologist every week to help me adjust, to help me be a father to my 3 children today. You know, to take my daughter, say, to a Ariana Grande concert, you know, even though it's one more problem that I have to deal with, in that those tickets are expensive. To take my son, switching him from taekwondo to now soccer, where he wants to be messy, you know, and where he doesn't clean his room, where I have to tell him, don't twerk, work. Being a dad is not easy, and when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, It's not that simple. But I'm dealing with it with my psychologist and my faith in God. Ladies and gentlemen, you may ask, what is perhaps the most difficult situation that I've experienced since my release? And I'll tell you. One of the most difficult situations upon my release as I stand before you today has been that the state of New York has been fighting me against my compensation. 5 years later, they are still fighting me when in fact I've proved my complete innocence and should be compensated. But finally, all the courts that they have tried to stop my case at from continuing have said no. This man's case will continue, and he deserves his compensation. What will I do? Well, I intend to continue being a steward with the blessings that God gives me for my freedom and whatever financial compensation he gives me, so that I can go out like a Johnny Appleseed of positivity and continue spreading seeds. Continue making the system aware of its imperfections. To prevent what happened to me from happening to other people. To go into the inner cities and help those kids to realize that they don't need to be involved in gangs. That you don't need a drug. You don't need heroin, which I heard was ravaging this particular community, to escape a problem. What you need is a belief in the power of love, in the belief that your family loves you and has allowed you and encouraged you to be in school today to make something of yourself. So that you can appreciate, so that I can appreciate as well, what it means to be alive and free. What it means to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, as the American ideals suggest we should. And that's what I'm just trying to do every day. To live my life, live it out loud by sharing my story of what happened to me. Because there's no time to be shy. But there's every reason to be vocal about what happened. Because every other day, I'm dealing with men who are coming out of prison, who I'm writing letters for to get them out of prison, who I'm working with attorneys with to help them out, to help them adjust. It's a problem. If I told you 2,000, let me just explain that the problem is worse than that. And one of the greatest problems that we have that continues this problem is not holding corrupt prosecutors accountable. In my case, such as James G. Rodriguez, the prosecutor who purposely sent me to prison. Not by mistake, but purposely, which I proved. And Detective Daniel Mazanova, who had prior to my case sent another innocent man to prison, who fortunately got out before me. I'm seeking to hold corrupt officials accountable, while grateful for those who do their job correctly. And so, my story really concludes where I began. And that is that this problem continues to be a public safety and human rights issue. Because what happened to me can happen to you. We don't know who's next. The question is, what will you do with your education and your knowledge of this problem to help prevent it, to help spread the word, and to know that in the respective positions that you get in life, what decision will you make about right and wrong? I believe that we shouldn't be governed through the impulse of words, but rather through the words of principle that guide our every step. And that's what I'm seeking to establish today, and it's what I encourage you to do. And I want to send you the very blessings from who I feel is telling me right now, that is my God Creator, to give you the blessings of peace, protection, health in all your relationships, and to bring you joy when you feel depression. To let you know that there is a God that loves you, and that whenever you feel like giving up, that you should pray, and that you should believe in yourself, and say that whenever you think you can't, you should and could, because I did. So what excuse do you have? Thank you.